All right, guys. All right, everybody. Here we go. The moment you've all been waiting for. A nice snippet from Matt Walsh's Thingamabobber. Now, listen, Matt Walsh, and I guess the Daily Wire made like a video about trans people and how they're bad or whatever. It's an interesting conversation to have for sure. The problem is that I watched some of this video and Matt Walsh isn't actually interested in the conversation, and this is a problem. I don't think it's bad. Okay. I understand that you would want to, that you might be uncomfortable with the idea of especially teaching like gender theory and stuff to kids. I get it. It's an uncomfortable topic. It's very new. I think it should be talked about. But from watching this video, from what I've seen, and we're going to watch the rest of it, he's not really there to have the conversation. He's mostly there to just epic dunk on people that give him decent answers. So let's watch.
What we do in gender studies is not just reduce gender.
All right, so they're a professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies in a university. So they're in college. So I think perfectly appropriate. There's no conversation about indoctrinating kids here. We're in college, so we don't even we're all good. To
what psychologists might call individual differences, but rather thinking about gender, and that's not women and man, but gender as a social form, something that kind of infuses itself into virtually all aspects of social life.
Okay,
let's talk about that then. I guess we should start with, we've got gender and sex, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two? Is there a difference?
I think that even if you're this is like it's a good question, right? Yeah, gender, sex is like biological. You can't change your sex. Okay. Gender is more of an expression of society. Most people's gender and sex align perfectly. That's called default mode. Some people's don't, and I'm sure there's a bunch of contributing factors. But yeah, sure.
Saw that in your questions, and I thought, my goodness, this is what we spend an entire semester kind of thinking through. But what we tend to think about in the social sciences today is that sex refers to a set of biological characteristics, and gender is a social construct or category.
That's a fair. This is super reasonable. You always hear or not always, but there's some people who are just like, they're the same, or like, nothing matters, basically. That you can change your sex, this, that, and the other thing. And this person's being very reasonable. He's like, yeah, this is the philosophy of gender theory. Even if you disagree with it, you have to engage in it to dismiss it. You know what I mean?
I think is often misleading about that characterization. Is allowed to be sort of messy and complicated.
And of course,
but in that framing, when you split them up into these wholly discrete constructs, studies scholars, and really.
So you notice that he's doing a montage, and the energy here is that this is boring and stupid. That's what it is. That's how you display the information. You just kind of go back and forth, and you make it seem like he's just rambling and running on. They cut it up in a way where they're not actually there for the conversation. So you can't formulate a response against it. You're just being dismissive of it, and now you just come off as kind of stupid. Even if what you think is right, you can't substantiate your correctness. You know what I mean? And it's you're not honestly engaging in the conversation. You're there. Establishing that you're there just to try to dunk on a genders professor who's being very honest and giving you decent answers.
More specifically, people who study gender and sex. We're not talking about sexuality right now. In the kind of academic universe that I travel in is that we see how deeply gendered ideas, cultural ideas about masculinity and femininity, maleness and femaleness, both in humans and in lots of other animals.
So are gender and sex two different things, or?
Well, I think
that's what people are saying. You disagree, which is fine, but it's just so stupid. It's supposed to be a dunk. It's so dumb.
They both are and they aren't. I'm comfortable saying that gender and sex are two different constructs, but they're deeply intertwined with each other.
And I think that that's such a really honest answer. There's so many people that say that gender and sex are nothing to do with each other, and they have everything to do with each other. Your gender identity is an absolute direct derivative of your biological sex. It being incongruent with your biological sex, that's a conversation to have, which I think is valid. But this idea that they're completely disconnected is ridiculous, because now you have people who want pronouns that are I'm dear gender or something. You can't be a dear gender. You can be a male or a female, and I'm open to the concept non-binary, some mixture in between. I get that. That's totally fine. But like, you have fucking like neo pronouns where you're like, oh, I'm a fairy. Shut the fuck up. That's not a gender. You know, gender, like it's on a spectrum of male or female. Like that's where it is. Gender is entirely on the spectrum of male and female. That's it. You know what I mean? So this is like a really honest thing that this person is saying. You know what I mean? Even if you disagree, they're constructing a logical foundation for what they believe, and that's so important.
We're talking about gender and sex, and there's a lot of controversies there. If we're talking about a trans woman has all of the male physical characteristics, so would that not be a male then? Couldn't we plainly say this person?
See, like, and this is okay. So this is like such a packed thing that he's saying, because it's coming from Matt Walsh, somebody who's like not trans affirming, and that's fine. I disagree with it, of course. The thing is that what he's saying is open to interpretation. So there's two different interpretations that you come up with. The first interpretation is somebody who is literally just like they if we look at this from like we look at it from the transgender Christmas tree that I always right? You have your sex, you have your gender identity, right? So your sex is biological. You have your gender identity, what you identify as. Then you have your gender expression. And then you have your pronouns that are like attached to all this, right? These are all like generally these things, right? So like what you could extrapolate here is he's saying like, what if you have someone who's biological male, they identify as a woman, but they're expressing themselves as a male, and they want to use like female pronouns or whatever. This is to me a problem, because if you're somebody who is a male that identifies as a woman, but you're making no attempt to express yourself as a woman, then what does it mean to you to be trans? That's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, but it's a very nuanced question. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's most likely what Matt Walsh is bringing up isn't this. What Matt Walsh is saying, what if you have a biological male who identifies as a woman? They also are trying to express themselves as a woman and use the female pronouns, women pronouns, but they look like a man. What are they? Now, that's another conversation to have. I think that it's a woman. I think that to me, for the most part, when it comes to the gender of a woman, not the biology, when it comes to like the sex of a woman, like what a woman means is somebody, you know, that generally has like a vagina and whatnot. But when it comes to like the gender conversation of what a woman is somebody who makes an absolute reasonable attempt to express themselves as a woman to society in an honest way. That's pretty much it, right? For the most part, we're at a point now where like that's pretty much it. So if you're making a reasonable attempt to express yourself as a woman, then I think you're a woman. Now, there's still conversations to be had about shared spaces with trans women and cis women, depending on how passable you are. Because, like, yeah, if you're somebody who's trying to be a passable woman, but you're not super passable, and you go into, like, let's say, like a woman's spa, that can get really uncomfortable for a lot of women, because that your identity as a trans person conflicts with the identities of cis women who are in intimate spaces like a spa, a woman-only spa, or a locker room. They are afraid of men because, you know, for obvious reasons. And so like that conflicts, and that's like a conversation about like the intersectionality there. So I totally understand about spaces like the bathroom as another instance, for instance, where it could get really upsetting when like a trans woman who's trying to be more passable and live their truth, but is very male identifying, or but not identifying, isn't very passable, how that can make you feel very uncomfortable. That's totally there. Those are conversations that are really great to have. But the thing is I don't think Matt Walsh is trying to have that conversation, because we've already established he doesn't really care about the real conversation. He's really just there to kind of dunk on this gender professor, which I think the person's being very intelligent and professional. From the very minimal that he's shown us, he's cut out so much, and the guy still, or the person, whatever, is coming up with a really solid, like just being solid. They're being honest. They're being intelligent, even if you disagree.
Person is a male.
Well, I guess it's like, why are you asking the question? I think I want to.
Let me just restart from the question part.
Are two different constructs, but they're deeply intertwined with each other.
We're talking about gender and sex, and there's a lot of controversies there. If we're talking about a trans woman has all of the male physical characteristics, so would that not be a male then? Couldn't we plainly say this person is a male?
Well, I guess it's like, why are you asking the question? I think I want to understand sort of why that's so important. So if
this is the reason that this question is important to ask, why you're asking the question, because there's different answers you can give. If you're somebody who doesn't really you don't validate trans people, you might be asking the question to truly understand what they're trying to say. Hey, I'm asking this question because I don't get it and I don't agree with you. Perfectly understandable. Or you could be asking the question to try to set somebody into a trap so that you have like good footage for a movie, which is more likely what Matt is trying to do here.
Someone tells
Just
you
to sort of understand reality, you know?
well, I mean, I think when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. So if a person says that
Sometimes, okay, let's be honest. Some people are transgenders. I'm just gonna say,
they're a woman or they're a man, then that's them telling you their gender is. I'm not so sure what social interactions would have to do with maleness or femaleness that would.
Well, I'm not even talking about social context. I'm just trying to start by getting to the truth. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with that language of like getting to the truth again in social life.
Why is that uncomfortable?
Because
and see, like Matt is here for like a dunk. He edited this video up in a way where it seems like this person got very quickly triggered, which is most likely not what actually happened. And he's just trying to assert that like you're living a lie. That's it. You're not trying to like reasonably explore the situation. You're here for a fucking absolute epic nene dunk for like your video about trans people. That doesn't come from a place of trying to understand or engage intelligently or logically, but just in a place that's just trying to be dismissive.
Because that it sounds actually deeply transphobic to me. And if you keep probing, we're going to stop the interview.
If I probe about what the truth is,
you keep invoking the word truth, which is condescending and rude. I'm saying to you,
how is the word truth condescending and rude?
Why don't you tell me what you're?
This is the point where like you would disengage, because now they're just playing like they're playing a word game with you just to try to like be annoying. This is like what a kid does when they just keep saying, but what if, you know what I mean? That's pretty much all that's happening.
Your truth is, and you're walking on 30 seconds more of thin ice before I get up.
That's fair.
What my truth is? Well, I don't think I really have a truth. I think that there's just the truth.
Yeah,
like
see,
the reality.
Again, he's not. This is what he came in for, to dunk on like the professor, right? Now you might believe that this is the truth what he's saying, but the whole point of these conversations is to kind of flesh out the reasoning, is to either try to produce your logic or show your logic to an audience, or to break the other person's logic with like a reasonable thing to say. Matt Walsh is just continuously saying, yeah, but you're just not right. That's basically all he's saying. There's no intelligent argument. That's it.
And so we should begin by trying to figure out what the reality is.
And why are you concerned with when someone else tells you that they're a man, or even if they use the word male, why are you concerned with not believing them?
That's a good question.
Well, you keep bringing it back to, how do you respond in a social situation? But,
that's what I do. I'm a social scientist.
Well, right, but we're in a university. This is a place of understanding truth, isn't it? Or
absolutely, we pursue truth, and I'm a social scientist, and that's what I do.
But you just said the truth is transphobic.
That you would say that if you're saying the truth is that I get to say you're not a man, show me your genitalia, that's transphobic.
No, I don't want to see anybody's genitalia. I just mean someone can make a statement about themselves that could be untrue. Like, for example, if I were to say that I'm a black man, could you,
by the power,
would you accept that, or would you be skeptical?
Yeah, of course you'd be skeptical. People can lie about their identities. I think that transgenderism and transracialism are drastically different. Race and sex, I think, are very different. Transracialism is a real thing. It's usually when like somebody adopts somebody of a different race, and then they kind of like take on those characteristics. They've only seen like one instance or two, I guess, instances of people trying to darken their skin to appear more black. I guess that's the conversation we're going to have more in the future. But, I suppose, Matt, if you legitimately thought you were black and you lived that truth every day and you darkened your skin, that maybe I would be open to the conversation about you actually being black. The problem is you're just saying you're black without anything else. A trans person that says that they're a woman, if they're making a reasonable attempt to be a woman, it's a different conversation to be had there. Right? Now, again, I think that transracialism and transgenderism are very different things. But, you're not making any attempt. If you came in with like black, Matt, you should have came in with blackface on, and then you should have said that. No, transracialism is real, like objectively. I just want you to know, it doesn't manifest itself in this way. Let me be clear. Transracialism is usually when somebody adopts somebody of like another race or something like that. Like, so let's say like a white black family adopted a white kid. That white kid might feel that they're black in some capacity. Like that's what racialism usually. That's what it manifests as. It's a real thing. It exists. It doesn't manifest itself as like usually like I want to change the color of my skin. It's usually an identification with whatever culture is associated with that race. You know what I mean? That's what it is. That's what transracialism is, and it's not the same thing at all. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. It doesn't manifest itself in this way.
Are you black? Are you African American? Are you biracial?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, you don't look that, and I don't think it doesn't sound like that's a genuine statement of who you are.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my point. I could make a statement about who I am that's incorrect.
Of course, I think it's well established that human beings can lie, yes.
Or not even lie. I mean, I could just be mistaken.
There's also a conversation to be had about the reason why somebody is trans. There's multiple factors to everything, right? There's always like a social factor and a biological factor. And then there's also the introduction of like a womb factor, which is a very interesting conversation to have, right? And so the womb factor is like, I remember, and I reference this a lot, but I watched a video about why people are gay. And apparently there's a trend where like for every success, like for when there's multiple men being born in like the same family or to the same mother, there's a higher chance of that kid being gay. Now, what that suggests to me, and this is very theoretical, that there's something in the womb that possibly makes kids gay. Like maybe it's a biological response to saying like, oh, we're making too many men. We need more male support figures. I don't really know. All it really points to is the idea that there might be a womb factor. So we have the factor of like there might be a womb response. It could be biological, and there could be environmental factors. Now, I think it takes incredibly harsh environmental factors to turn somebody trans, just like it takes harsh environmental factors to make somebody gay. For instance, like in prisons, people who aren't gay are gay more now that they're in prison because they're in an incredibly intense social situation. I think it takes an incredibly intense social situation to make somebody trans. But I don't think that you could apply this womb factor. If we look at these three different things, right? So we're going to do like biology, we're going to do biological factor, we're going to do a womb factor, and we're going to do like an environmental factor. When it comes to like a gay or a trans, let's say a trans person, there's possibly like a biological aspect there that would make somebody trans. That makes sense to me. Maybe there's they're born with some kind of like brain chemistry thing that would make somebody trans. There's also, I would say that there's a womb factor as well. Like, yeah, there's a womb factor for trans people as well. Like maybe that could make them more feminine in some capacity. I don't know. But we've talked about it before that there's a trend. I know I said gay, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that maybe that could apply to trans people as well. And then I think that there is a bit of an environmental factor. But this is a little bit more complicated to me when it comes to environmental factors of like being trans. To me, I look at it as like a spectrum. So let's just say that we have a spectrum and everybody lies in the spectrum somewhere of like their identity, like their gender identity, right? Let's say that like here's where a very feminine male lies. We'll say like masculinity to femininity, right? I think with some kind of social encouragement, there could be a bit of a shift one way or the other in some capacity. I've noticed a trend. Sorry, I'm covering this. I've noticed like there's a trend. We don't see as many feminine men anymore or as many masculine women. And I think that's because there's a slight environmental factor that might push towards the comfortability of feminine men being trans women. Now, maybe it's because historically they would have identified as women and there just wasn't an availability. Or maybe there's a little bit of like a social encouragement to go into that direction, a social categorization that might influence them going from like somebody who would be a very feminine male that's attracted to men, for instance, to a trans woman that's attracted to men, right? So I think that there's a factor. It's something that we're talking about and we're exploring here, right? When it comes to the racial aspect here, right? So I think that there's like a trans environmental factor. When it comes to a racial aspect, biologically, obviously there's a racial aspect. When it comes to environments, I think that there is a cultural racial aspect, right? There's like cultures associated with races. That's a conversation to have. I don't think it's necessary. I don't really think that those cultures are like inherent. They're environmental. They were created based on like I'm sure like multiple sets of conditions. But when it comes to a womb factor, there's no racial womb factor that's introduced in any capacity. If there's an imbalance of your testosterone or your estrogen, it's not going to push you in a direction that would make you more black or white. So it doesn't make any sense, right? And that could also be a biological factor too, right? Like you're not going to have some kind of incongruence in this way where you're too much estrogen or not enough estrogen or too much testosterone, not enough testosterone, or some kind of a body chemical response. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? Men and women are like, I would say it's just not going to happen, right? And so we're exploring this idea, but that's why transracial doesn't manifest itself in the same way, and why I don't think it's as valid, because you're missing like a lot of these nuanced factors of like some kind of like a like chemistry. The skin color is like exclusively created based on like the environmental condition that you're in, like from like a sunlight perspective. Like, how much sun is there? What has the terrain historically been in an area where people grew up? That's all it is. Whereas men and women are seen across every single culture. So, you know, obviously it's a much more, being a man or a woman is a much more intense factor than being like black or white, et cetera, et cetera. So I just kind of wanted to flesh that out in here. It would be such a shame if this entire thing gets DMCA'd and I can't post this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure where you're going.
I guess this all comes back, this all comes down to really one question.
Okay.
Especially women, gender, and sexuality studies. So what is a woman?
Like I said before, I think a woman is, and we said this before, a woman is somebody who is seriously making an absolute attempt to express themselves and identify themselves as a woman in society. For the most part, it doesn't really matter. The only times where it matters, like from a biological perspective, is in sports and when like you're dating. And your doctor needs to know too, because a trans woman can still get prostate cancer, of course, right? But these things don't really matter to us unless we are close to them. Like, it doesn't really matter in sport. Like, it does matter in sports. It very much matters a lot. But for the most part, like, it doesn't matter unless it's in sports. So when you see a trans woman on the street, it doesn't matter what's going on because you're not going to fuck them, right? You're not playing sports with them, so, and you're not their doctor, so it doesn't really matter to you from like that social perspective, unless they were playing sports. Then just like, hey, listen, you have biological fat, which is already like a very much the truth. Like you have biological, you know, strengths for being a trans woman and going through male puberty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But outside of those things, if it's not sports or a doctor or you're not dating them, it doesn't matter. These things don't actually matter because like women and men, the way that we operate nowadays in society, which I think is good, is that like here's an opportunity that's presented. If you as a person can satisfy the credential of this particular job or something, then you get it. That's all it really boils down to. But boom, we're one and done, right? That's pretty much all it is.
Why do you ask that question?
I just really like to know.
What do you think the answer to that question is?
Interesting.
Well, I'm asking. That's why I came to a college professor who's this is what you do.
What other kinds of answers have you gotten?
A lot of like this, where you're not answering, and I've gotten a lot of that. So
I think it's interesting that you say that some of the people you've interviewed have been reluctant to answer it, and I think that has a lot to do with the questions that preceded it, and the way that you've conducted yourself in the interview.
That's fair.
How have I conducted myself?
How do you think you've conducted yourself?
I mean, this is the proper response. He's just giving it back to him. That's the thing. It's like if you're asking for a clip, you're asking to clip it so you can make him look stupid. You're not asking as a way to, because I would actually like to know what that person thinks a woman is. It'd be an interesting conversation to have. Actually, Papa, trans women have a significantly less chance of getting prostate cancer. Who cares if that's true or not? Is so irrelevant. It doesn't even matter. They still have a chance to get prostate cancer. Cisgender women don't have a chance to get prostate cancer. You're being really weird about your like what you're the implications of what you're saying is that what you're effectively trying to tell me is that like the doctor doesn't need to know if you're a trans or woman or not, or a trans man or not, but they do, because you're going to have different predispositions to different things if you're trans or cis. Okay, so what you're saying, yeah, maybe it is a lower chance. I don't know. It's possible. If that's true, that's totally fine. Doctor still needs to know about that. Yeah, I know, but like, what was the point of what you said? Like, you're like, actually, Papa, trans women what was the point of what you're saying? Hey, they have a less of a chance to get they still have a chance to get prostate. Doctor needs to know about these factors, right? So like your information, the way that you presented it, was meant to be dismissive rather than like informational. You know what I'm saying? Because it doesn't change a single thing that I said. Papa, trans women have a very high chance of having a PP. Very true. Very good point.
You just really don't want to answer the questions, do you?
Okay.
I came today very willing and enthusiastic about answering questions about women's and gender sexuality studies, which is
so you wanted to answer questions about women's studies, and so shouldn't the first answer you should be able to provide is what exactly is a woman?
Well, for me, it's actually a really simple answer, and that's a person who identifies as a woman.
But what are they identifying as?
As a woman.
But what is that?
as a woman.
Do you know what a circular definition is?
Yeah, see, he came for like the circular definition. This is what he came to do. So this makes the sense now. Matt Walsh is asking the question of like, what is a woman? So that, because the answer that the person's going to give is like, it's similar to mine. It's like somebody who identifies as a woman. That's pretty much say that as well. As long as it's like they seriously feel that they're a woman. It's like, well, what is a woman? Right? He's looking for the dunk. Like, yeah, we could talk about that. Like, what does it mean to be a woman? I mean, it's different depending on society. There's different social constructs that women tend to align with, but it's generally being like more feminine, for the most part, like being a little bit more feminine. And express like wearing women like feminine clothing that's generally assigned to be feminine, potentially speaking in a way that's feminine. It's not an absolute thing because there's more masculine women, of course, but like that's what it means. And it's a hard question to specifically like answer in like a very finite way, because what a woman and what a man is are very different, especially in Western societies where things are less gendered, even if they are actually gendered. So like that's what it would be. So, but the circular definition or thing is it's push the person to the point of being frustrated because you're not actually engaging in an honest way, and then try to dunk on them with like a very basic thing that's very easy to answer, which is I've just answered now. Again, you could think that you could disagree with trans people. That's fine. I disagree with you, of course, but this in the way that he's doing it, he's not there to intelligently engage. He set up an interview under the guise of having a respectable conversation to set the person up to try to just like nay and dunk on them. That's all it is.
I do.
It's sort of like what you're doing right now, where a woman is a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, because you're seeking what we would call in my field of work an essentialist definition of gender. I think it sounds like you would like me to give you a set of biological or cultural characteristics that are associated with one gender or the other.
I'm not seeking any type of definition. I'm just seeking a definition.
Yeah, and I gave you one.
I mean, I don't know. Honestly, listen. That I mean, like I thought that this person here was being a fucking weenie and just saying like, oh, imagine you seek this discussion out and you get absolutely rolled in the conversation. But they're right. I'm sorry. They're right. After watching that, they're right. I don't know. Maybe I come from a perspective where like gender is very philosophical, and it's like very fun to talk about and engage in and be into, like, you know. But Matt Walsh isn't there for that. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and another special shout out to all my Patreon and Twitch subs. If you'd like to support this channel further than you already have by just watching the video alone, go down to the links below where you can sub on my Patreon, which will allow you to get your name on this beautiful black wall. Or you can go to the Twitch page and you can actually use a free Amazon Prime sub, if you have Amazon Prime, to subscribe. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.